So hello everyone. This is another edition of UX on Coffee with the great Vitaly Friedman. And before we start, Vitaly, I want to introduce myself. My name is Avi Itzkovich. I'm from Tel Aviv, a founder of UX Salon, a UX designer, and humble coffee lover. And for this conversation, I prepared here, as you can see, a coffee mug that I received when I was speaking at a conference in Poland. So.
Oh, wow.
And tell us a little bit where you are right now before you introduce yourself.
Yes, so right now I don't have a fancy cup of coffee like Avi does, but I do have a nice, simple cappuccino. And as a special add-on to it, I also have a croissant with me, which Avi doesn't have. So it makes me a bit fancier than him, even although he has a very cool cup of coffee.
Yes.
Right now I'm in Zurich. Yes, that's a very nice cup of coffee. Right now I'm in Zurich, Switzerland, and there's a conference called Frontend Conf, and I just spoke there yesterday, and I desperately tried to find a lounge where it would be calm. So the best I could find is a staircase, which has a very good connection still. So, hello everyone.
So thanks for having this coffee with me. Cheers.
Cheers. And here coffee.
Yes.
Cheers.
So the premise of this conversation, by the way, is that we're going to have we're going to talk until we run out of coffee. There's no time limitation. When you run out of coffee or I run out of coffee, the conversation is over.
All right, that sounds right.
So,
but then I have to ask you:
yes.
Are you a fast coffee drinker? Are you a slow coffee drinker?
Depends on the conversation.
Okay. So also how it goes.
So I'm speaking with Vitaly Friedman, who is known as the editor-in-chief of UX of Smashing magazine, and also a speaker, a designer, a front-end developer. Tell us a little bit more about what you do. Like, what's maybe I'm missing something.
Oh, Avi, I wish I knew. Seriously, I have no idea what I'm doing these days. It's been just incredible because I'm trying to be. Kind of find that spot that makes me really, really happy, and I know what it is. But at the same time, well, that's probably better. But at the same time, it's probably very difficult for me to say, "Oh, I do this and I don't do this." So I do front end, I do UX, I solve problems, I do editing, I speak at conferences, I run workshops. We also run consultancy. We also organize conferences. So every single day, it's something new.
You're a very busy man.
I wouldn't say I'm busy. I pretend to be busy, and it works really well. But also, I try to be random in a way. So I think we should all embrace randomness because there is so much cool stuff you can do with it. So just doing some random things which you feel are totally out of your comfort zone, I think it's really important. This is what I'm trying to do every day, to be honest.
So randomness is about learning?
About everything. So exploring things. So one of the things I tend to do sometimes is to wake up at 7 o'clock or so, 7 a.m., and then you go to a long-distance bus station, right, where you have buses leaving. And then I'm picking just a random stop, let's say stop number 6. And I'm going there, and I'm going to pick the first bus. And I'm going to go to stop number, I don't know, 5 or 4, right? And I always end up in places where I would never go otherwise. And sometimes it's not spectacular, I must admit, but sometimes it's, you end up in a really nice little village with maybe, I don't know, 20,000 people or so, and you explore it, and you get a coffee somewhere, and then you sit down, and you probably still have your connection, so you can do some work if you have to, but you also are exposed to things that you would never see otherwise, unless you're really, really lucky. So this is kind of a part of the experience, and also, of course, learning. So think about the things that you don't know at all, and just dive into it and see what you can do with it. And if you can't do much with it, that's okay. I mean, we're losing a lot of time by doing things that we don't care about, right? Anyway, like waiting in a bus stop or, I don't know, waiting in a queue at the airport security. This is what I call the dead time. So maybe we can introduce some meaningful dead time by exploring and doing things that we're not used to.
But that's really brave. I mean, where do you have the time or the idea that this is the day you're going out?
But this doesn't take time. I mean, because I'm really privileged to be able to work when I'm traveling. I can be traveling in a bus. Sorry, I can be working in a bus. I can be working in a tram. I can't have a Skype conversation or like a Skype call like this, obviously. But editing articles, reviewing articles, preparing the talks, preparing training material, replying to emails, it's all possible even if you're offline.
Okay, great. So great,
Some, of course, it's
great
not
tip.
like fully, but to all, like, that's really good stuff.
So, but
So I try to embrace it all the time.
I think, but mostly you're known for the for Smashing Magazine, or you're the founder, co-founder of Smashing Magazine. And well, to me, originally I got to know you because I got to do some articles for Smashing Magazine. And Smashing Magazine is a well-known magazine, and I think in part for the great content, but also in part because it was the first example, the first great example of responsive design.
Interesting, could be.
I think that
Yeah.
designers were talking about it and showing it to each other because it was an example of responsive design. It created this resonance around how a website should look like. So I wanted to talk to you about a little bit about this because actually you're coming to Tel Aviv to speak about responsive design in December.
Right.
So to me, you're the greatest or the first kind of innovator or the first pioneer of responsive design. And of course, you teach about it a lot. You teach about the front end part of it, and you teach about the design part of it. How did it start? Like, how did you realize that you want to create a really good responsive design website?
Right. So basically, I've been designing websites since 1998 or 9 or so. I was freelancing a lot back until Smashing, and then at some point, 2006, 2007, I kind of dropped it because we wanted to focus on magazine. And then I kind of reinvented it for myself. So I started diving a lot into front end and UX and everything. So it was kind of, I always stayed on the pulse because you always, for good articles to be published, you need to know what's going on, right? Even although they might be outside of the scope of your expertise, you still need to know what's going on and the topics that are kind of important. So when Ethan published that article on Listapart about responsive design, I jumped into it the day one. Like,
Really?
pretty much unlike everything else, to be honest. This wasn't something particular or special. Whenever there was an article where everybody was talking about things, I would just jump on it and see what you can do. And I really liked the concept. I kind of tried to play with it and see what you can do. And I developed some sort of sense of how you could design or build websites, responsive websites over time. And then, of course, we also were planning a redesign anyway for Smashing. So this was a kind of starting point. Okay, let's think about this concept or this idea that was published on Listapart by Ethan, and let's see how we can apply it or translate it to some degree to what we are doing. So we played with all kind of different techniques, and some of the practices we use would be considered to be outdated today, I'm sure, but we tried to find a way. And so yes, I think it took us quite a lot of time. I mean, the entire process took maybe 1 year or so. Not like full-time 1 year, but still. And many people involved, and as you always know. But in the end, I learned a lot along the process. And so when it went live, and it was, I think, early 2013, or maybe even early 2012, I will have to check. It was like a big deal, because it was like a big-scale project, so to say, brought on these rails of responsive design. Which was really interesting. So for me personally, I'm just really try to see what's happening on the web because I'm really so excited about the web. And whenever there are things happening in Flexbox, SVG, whatever, be it technical or be it non-technical, I will just dive in and see what I can do with it. Because you can abuse and misuse technology in so many positive ways. It's just incredible. So I'm really excited about it.
So you think today it would take the same time to do something similar? What's the difference between now and then?
I think, in general, if you think about the process, kind of where we went, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, and where we are now, I think everything is much more professional these days. Much, much more professional. Also, it's much more versatile and diverse. It's very difficult to kind of move along the process because there are so many unknowns. It's always very, very difficult to kind of be able to move in the process very quickly. because there are so many unknowns. But we learned a few things. One of them is design patterns. We know what works and what doesn't work to some degree because, based on our experience in responsive design, we know that the accordions, for example, are kind of a nice pattern that people tend to use a lot. At the same time, the hamburger icon is the thing that you have to be a bit careful. It's something that everybody is using, but you need to run some tests. And also the way it's displayed and how it's positioned and placed, this plays a role. So all of the little design patterns. And in the workshop, I'll be doing kind of not the basic stuff, but much more advanced stuff, like dashboard and complex tables and data grids and things like that, maps and so on. We're kind of getting to a point where we know what to do with those interface elements. The thing is, we also have two other elements that we need to keep in mind. One of them is the technical side. So the technical side can provide some challenges, but because technology is rapidly evolving, it also helps us to kind of push the capabilities of our websites further, right? So we're getting there as well. It's a bit more complicated, but we're getting there. And we kind of know what to do as well. The missing part, which is the third asset, right, is the process, the workflow of how you're getting from nothing to something. And this something doesn't have to be a perfect prototype. It could be like a first prototype. It could be like a really basic static HTML page, which is not even responsive at first. Or it could be just a set of components that you design or build first. So this is what everybody's trying very, very hard today to understand how we can get to results fast. And this is where all of those things like pattern libraries and style guides and design systems and style tiles and assets libraries and all those things, which are kind of the same thing to some degree, come into place. Just us, designers and developers, trying to break down this complexity we have on the web into manageable little chunks, sometimes even reusable chunks of user interface of code, and then reuse them as we're building more and more complex websites. Also websites that translate to all kinds of experiences, right? To small watches and to big fridges and to big TV screens and to regular desktop screens. This is the missing part. This is where things are really, really complicated today. Because I'm yet to see a pattern library or a design system or whatever that survived for more than, let's say, 6 months after its initial release. Mm-hmm. This is what people are really struggling with. I mean, unless you have a big, just to clarify, unless you have a big corporation behind you that supports your efforts and has a dedicated pattern library team like Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, these big companies, they can afford having a team that would have a pattern library team, a design system team. If you have like a little small agency and you have maybe 3 developers and 2 designers, this is going to be really hard, and this is what most people are struggling with.
So you're saying that patterns become obsolete. Why is it hard?
The thing that is hard is because we know what to do from the design perspective. We kind of know what to do from a technical perspective, but kind of connecting them in a way that it will be efficient is really difficult. Because so how do you do it? I mean, many of us are using Agile, right? Many of us are still using Waterfall, right? So this is great for the communication between designers and developers and kind of moving things forward. But if at some point there is a new requirement coming in, somebody from the design perspective has to look into all the components that were designed, right, and put them together to create a new one, and then the same thing is probably going to happen on the technical side. Now the problem is that component that you create has to work across all of these dimensions. You also need to think about performance, right? You can't just pick any component or just design it in any way. You have to be careful through accessibility implications, performance implications, and so on. There are many kind of unknowns that have to be considered. And because there is an uncertainty, this is why many design agencies that I've been working with introduce this responsive factor in the process. You don't know how much time it's going to take to debug, moving, kind of adding one piece of an interface from the design all the way to the release. So they introduce this 1.6 factor. It's like everything is going to be 1 times 6 more expensive because it's responsive design, which is a default anyway these days. Or it's going to take 1.6 more time because you need to buffer in the time for debugging for this responsive component. Again, it has to fit in everywhere. Takes more time for QA and everything. So this is kind of what makes things difficult. Because also maintaining a petal library or maintaining this system of components is not really easy. And the alternative would be, of course, to create Photoshop mockups or Illustrator mockups or Fireworks mockups.
Sketch.
Or Sketch, of course. Sorry. But then you would need to create like lots of them. And that takes a lot of time. A lot of time. So this is where many people are struggling at the moment, at least in my experience. Especially the bigger you are, the more difficult and slower the entire process will be. And you can't afford being slow when in this dynamic thing it's called the web. Because if a watch comes up, people kind of expect maybe within a week that it's going to work there, or in the fridge, or anywhere else. So you can't afford just doing nothing for a month or so, or being too slow about it. So the processes have to be optimized as well. You can't just have a designer doing something for 2 weeks and developer doing something for 2 weeks, and then have a 2 weeks phase where the decision makers actually decide what is going to happen, how it's going to be kind of embedded into existing business logic or existing interface. This is just not possible anymore because it would take way too much time.
We're almost running out of coffee. I want to ask you a few more questions about learning, because it seems to me that you read a lot. Because you said to me that every article that comes out on Smashing Magazine, you read it, which requires a lot of focus.
Yes.
So how do you do it, and can you give me a little bit more about what's your secret of getting great content and learning?
Well, honestly, I think that the best thing I learned over the last 10 years or so, because this is how long Smashing Magazine exists now. It's actually 10th birthday, going to be our 10th birthday in 6 days from now, or 5 days from now.
That's great.
I read really quickly. I find it very difficult to read actual books, like fiction or documentary books, whatever, because I tend to skim very, very fast. I tend to scan very, very fast. Sometimes I feel like I'm like Google autocomplete sentences in my head. So as I read an article, I kind of start reading a sentence, and then I kind of know how it's going to be finished. So I can find the dot, the full stop, and then move on to the next one. So I can be really, really quick at scanning and getting the information really kind of out of the article very quickly. This is probably a skill you learn when you're doing the same thing, more or less the same thing for 10 years. So I'm reading a lot. And as I'm reading, I actually always try to doubt whether what's written is correct or not. This is my editorial duty, right? And I apply it to pretty much not only the articles that I edit, but also to everything I read on the web, which makes me think about everything I read, right? Kind of makes me go critical about every single sentence I'm reading, which again forces me to kind of connect the dots with the experiences I had made before, right? And also try to understand how I could apply a certain thing to my context, to my projects, because I'm also doing a lot of consultancy these days, right? So this kind of forces me to learn every single day with every single article that I'm reading, right? Just because I have to be critical all the time. And that's actually really great. I really enjoy it. And then I jump into code, or I jump into my notes or my little notebook where I do sketches or like notes with pencil, just to see, okay, maybe I should really kind of try to embrace this idea from a different angle or a different perspective. And this is how learning happens. I think this is the most important skill we have today in the web industry. Actually, it's really, really important.
The most important skill is to learn.
To learn.
Oh, of course,
yes.
Yeah. But I mean, usually how do you comment the regular people who can't speed, who have very limited time? What's your
I think that you don't have to read the entire article all the time. I mean, I think that we all are used to scanning to some degree. But I think that if there is a topic that interests you, read an article, maybe just, even just if you read just a few a day. I feel like I don't have to bookmark anything anymore, because if something is important, there is an important article, it will show up on Twitter. I mean, I will accidentally stumble upon it again and again and again and again until I finally read it. So I don't feel like I need to bookmark things anymore.
So you don't use
Because,
Pocket.
no, actually I don't. I often subscribe to many email newsletters, for example. So if I need to look things up, for example, for a specific topic, like say SVG, I'm just going to scan through that inbox of that email, of that newsletter inbox, and then check what's happened in the SVG world, so to say, right? So I always have a fallback. I know where to look. And I think this is also very important because I think we cannot afford being specialists in everything these days. I'm not very good in JavaScript, to be honest. I'm pretty good in CSS, I think, and I feel that I'm pretty good at problem solving and UX. Right, so this is good for me to know, but it doesn't mean that I can't answer a question related to JavaScript, because I will always know where to dive in. So having this global perspective, a global overview, I think is way more important than just being an extreme specialist in everything you can, right? So I do specialize in those little things, areas. But at the same time, I think it's critical for me and for others probably as well, to have a nice overview of what's happening, right? So even if you don't understand what's happening, I mean, if you look in the React world, seriously, it's like booming and blowing up every single day. There is so much happening. The community is enormous. And I have no idea what's happening there. But I
I
will
don't
know
know.
it.
I have no idea what React is even. So
Yeah, okay. So, but then I kind of have an understanding of what it means and what projects could benefit from it. So developers could then jump in and, take care of it. Or just being able to dive in and say, okay, so I'm not sure what exactly this, React thing is or how exactly it's going to be applied, but at least this is an option worth considering. So maybe I should look into it on a Friday night or so. Okay, or maybe on the Thursday night because Friday is a holiday. Is a work
it's
off
a
day.
fun day. Yes.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, this is an important thing, I guess.
But okay. So in regards to the back to your hat as an editor, I wanted to ask you two things before we end. First of all, how do you? There's probably like you can notice trends in design where you get a lot of articles about a certain thing. What's the latest trend these days? What do you find most
I
interesting
think that
stuff to?
it's a very good question. I think that many people started caring a lot about performance these days. Um, this is something that hasn't been as widely accepted, I would say, 2, 3 years ago. It was considered to be merely a thing that backend developers would do as a last step of the process. Once you're finished with design and you're finished with the front end and everything, then you will actually think about optimizing the code and so on, right? So now it's kind of moving a bit towards the beginning of the process where you start thinking about performance early on, which I think is really important, really interesting, because there are many slow experiences still. Although we are, most of us, I guess, on a good connection, most people around the world are on a very slow connection, and they have real difficulties, connecting to websites. And we usually don't feel this responsibility for making lightning fast experiences, but we should. And so there is a strong movement for prioritizing performance above everything else. This is one thing. And the second thing is, again, the workflow bit. Because everybody is trying to figure out how to move quickly in the responsive world. So we talk a lot about pattern libraries and design systems and maintenance and things like that, which is a very important aspect which we haven't considered in the past. Because in the past it was more about how to build or how to design a responsive site, but not necessarily maintenance. And now we are still trying to figure out how to build, how to design, although we know how to design in isolation, we know how to build in isolation, but this workflow bit, the part process, is taking time. Right? Everybody is trying to figure this out as well.
That's very interesting. That's very cool. Thanks for that little. I'm gonna try to look into that now.
Of
Uh,
course.
now, last question: how do people get published? I know a lot of people want to know this. How do people get published in Smashing Magazine?
So that's a good question too. I actually wrote and published an article just 2 or 3 weeks
Oh
ago,
yeah.
explaining the entire process.
Okay.
I can send the link later.
I will put it in the link
All right.
below.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's kind of, I don't want to, frighten people. It's kind of an obnoxious process, if you ask me. Some people feel demoralized or beaten or it's not that bad, but some people do not feel very comfortable with it because it involves a lot of work. So we don't just accept drafts, we don't just accept articles. So if somebody sends a draft, and the worst thing that I can receive is, hey, here's a draft, so why don't you tell me what you think about it? No, this is not how it works. So we start a conversation, right? This is how the article starts. We always start a conversation when either we approached authors, usually it's people who just designed something or built something. They don't need to have a writing experience at all. That's not important, that doesn't matter. But maybe you open source something, or maybe you wrote an article somewhere about something. We're always hunting for these people who write on Medium or on their own blogs or in other magazines, right? Or even on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever. And sometimes they also come to us, right? And then we actually start talking about, so we ask the author, what is the thing that excites you most today? What are the experiences that you made recently where you thought, wow, this is really interesting problem I solved, right? So we're trying to kind of find this core, which really is interesting to the author. And then from there out, we are radiate out to find the outline that would actually cover this core, so to say. So it's always about something that the person has experienced themselves, right? It's not, write an article about React, or it's not write an article about UX strategy. It's more about the lessons learned from the actual projects. So tell us about your project and what you learned from it, and then we can actually start working on the outline. And then once we have that, we start working on the draft. And then at some point, we have a first draft, which is where we look very critically at the first draft. And there is always a lot of feedback coming from me or other editors, authors. And then when you have a final draft, it goes to technical review. So we have people like...
let me stop you there. I think that, but the article would cover that.
Yes, but I mean, what I just want to tell is it's a kind of a long process, right? But at the same time, if you want to write and you have something to share, you don't need any kind of writing experience at all. We can also just run an interview with you and do it ourselves. If you have something interesting to say, this is enough.
I could say personally, as a publisher in Smashing Magazine, the reward after all this labor to get this stuff out and so many people reading it is enormous. So it's worth the hard work for sure.
Oh, I hope so. Yes. For every article, it's a labor of its own. That's true.
Vitaly, can you show us around a little bit what's going on in the background there before we say our goodbye?
Of course. So let's see what I can show you.
You are in Switzerland right now.
Yes. So I can't show you Switzerland. I mean, it's probably not. I'm going to go to mountains. But what I can show you is the venue. Maybe it's better this way, actually. Can you see it better?
Oh.
So there is a conference happening.
Is it running right now?
Yes, it's actually running right now. Do you want a croissant, maybe?
Oh, thank you.
No?
So Vitaly, thanks a lot for this conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time in your busy schedule to speak to me over coffee.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'll see you soon. I'll see you December 5th in Tel Aviv.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to it. So this is going to be fun. And say hi to everybody in Tel Aviv, like everybody.
Will do. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.